The blood on Katherine Kane's dress had been there for 3 days when she stumbled into Kearney, Nebraska, and the townspeople knew sin when they saw it. She had walked 14 miles with blistered feet, her auburn hair matted with dust and sweat, her green eyes hollow from hunger and the kind of exhaustion that settles deep into the bones. The year was 1879, and this frontier town along the Platte River had seen its share of trouble, but nothing quite like the spectacle of a woman alone, covered in what everyone assumed was evidence of her wickedness. The dress had once been blue calico, a proper traveling dress, but now it was torn at the hem and stained dark across the bodice. She did not cry. She had no tears left. The first person to see her was old Mrs. Henderson, who had been sweeping the boardwalk outside the general store. The woman's face had gone white, then red, then she had rushed inside and locked the door. Within minutes, it seemed the entire town had materialized on Main Street, faces pressed against windows, men stepping out of saloons and the bank, women clutching their children close as if Katherine carried some contagion that might infect their innocence. She stood in the middle of the dusty street, swaying slightly, her lips cracked and bleeding. She needed water. She needed rest. She needed anyone, to show her a single kindness. Instead, she got Reverend Sinclair. He emerged from the white chapel at the end of Main Street, like a crow descending on carrion, his black coat billowing behind him despite the windless afternoon. He was a tall man, thin as a fence post, with sharp features and eyes that burned with the kind of righteousness that left no room for mercy. He had been the spiritual leader of Kearney for 8 years, and in that time, he had built a congregation that feared God and, perhaps more importantly, feared him. "Stop right there, woman," he commanded, his voice carrying across the silent street. "Do not take another step toward decent folk." Katherine had stopped because her legs would carry her no further. She sank to her knees in the dirt, her hands falling limply to her sides. Reverend Sinclair approached but kept a careful distance, as if her very presence might contaminate him. "Look at her," he announced to the gathered crowd. "Covered in blood and shame. I know your kind, woman. I know what you have done. The evidence of your sin is written plain as day across your body." "Please," Katherine whispered, her voice barely audible. "Water. Water." The preacher's laugh was sharp and cold. "You seek physical refreshment when your soul is as black as pitch. Confess your sins, woman. Tell these good people what wickedness you have committed that you should arrive in such a state." Katherine's vision blurred. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she could feel consciousness slipping away from her like sand through her fingers. "I did not." She began, but the words tangled in her parched throat. She did not what? Did not kill a man in some sordid affair, did not sell her virtue for coin, did not run from the consequences of her depravity. Reverend Sinclair turned to address his audience, warming to his sermon. "This is what becomes of women who stray from the path of righteousness. This is the face of sin, and we must not allow it to take root in our town. She is tainted, marked by her own choices, and we would be complicit in her evil if we were to offer her succor. That is enough." The voice came from behind the crowd, deep and steady, and it carried the kind of authority that made people turn and listen. The crowd parted, and through the gap walked a man who looked like he had been carved from the same rough country that surrounded them. Grant Hawthorne was 32 years old, though the lines around his eyes and the weathering of his face might have added a few years to that count. He stood just over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders built from years of ranch work, and hands that were calloused from rope and leather. His hair was dark brown, kept short beneath the wide-brimmed hat he wore, and his eyes were a startling blue that missed very little. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy: dark trousers, a dusty shirt, a vest, and boots that had seen 1,000 miles of hard ground. He had been in town to sell cattle, a twice-yearly trip he made from his ranch 15 miles north of Kearney. He had been loading supplies into his wagon when he heard the commotion, and something in the preacher's tone had set his jaw tight and sent him walking toward the confrontation. "I said that is enough, Reverend." Grant walked past the preacher without looking at him and knelt beside Katherine. Up close, he could see that she was younger than he had first thought, maybe 22 or 23. Her face was sunburned and streaked with dirt, but beneath that, he could see delicate features, the kind of face that would be beautiful if it were not so ravaged by suffering. "Can you hear me, miss?" Katherine's eyes focused on him with difficulty. This man was different. His voice was gentle, concerned rather than condemning. She tried to speak, but only a dry croak emerged. Grant looked up at the crowd. "Someone get me water, now." Nobody moved. They all looked to Reverend Sinclair. "Do not interfere, Hawthorne," the preacher said coldly. "This woman is a sinner and must face judgment for her transgressions. We do not know what evil she has done, but the evidence suggests the worst." "The evidence suggests she is hurt and needs help," Grant said, his voice hardening. "And the last I checked, that is what Christians are supposed to do: help those in need. Not when they are tainted by sin, not when offering aid might encourage further wickedness. We must think of the moral fabric of this community." Grant stood, and though he was not a violent man by nature, there was something in his stance that made several people in the crowd take an involuntary step back. "You are going to stand there and tell me that your God, who you preach about every Sunday, would turn away a dying woman because she has blood on her dress? Blood we know nothing about, the blood of her victims," Reverend Sinclair insisted, "or her own blood, or someone else's that got on her while she was trying to help, or a dozen other explanations that do not involve her being a murderer." Grant's voice rose. "You are willing to let a woman die in the street based on your assumptions. What does that say about you?" The Reverend's face flushed with anger. "How dare you question my judgment? I am the spiritual leader of this town, and I will not have some ranch hand who shows up twice a year tell me how to minister to my flock." "Then minister," Grant shot back. "Show me this Christian charity you preach about. Or step aside and let someone else do it." The tension in the street was thick enough to cut. The townspeople shifted uncomfortably, caught between their fear of the preacher's wrath and the nagging voice of conscience that Grant's words had awakened. They had all heard Reverend Sinclair preach about mercy and forgiveness, but they had also learned that his version of those virtues came with conditions that seemed to change depending on who needed them. Grant did not wait for the standoff to resolve itself. He bent down, slipped one arm under Katherine's knees and the other behind her back, and lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. She was lighter than she should be, he noted grimly. How long had she been without food? "What do you think you are doing?" Reverend Sinclair demanded. "Taking her somewhere she can be cared for," Grant said. He started walking toward his wagon. "You will be harboring a criminal, a sinner. If you do this, you will be just as tainted as she is." Grant stopped and turned back to face the preacher. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but every word carried clearly in the hushed street. "If showing mercy to someone in need makes me tainted in your eyes, Reverend, then I will wear that stain with pride. Because I would rather stand before God having erred on the side of kindness than having let another human being die, because I was too concerned with my own righteousness to get my hands dirty." He did not wait for a response. He carried Katherine to his wagon, laid her gently in the back on a bed of hay he had prepared for the trip home, and climbed up into the driver's seat. As he picked up the reins, He saw Doc Brennan emerge from the crowd, medical bag in hand. "Mind if I ride along, Grant?" the doctor asked. He was a portly man in his 50s with kind eyes and a reputation for treating anyone who needed help, regardless of their ability to pay. "Be grateful for it, Doc," Grant said. The doctor climbed up beside him, and Grant urged the horses forward. Behind them, Reverend Sinclair stood in the street, his face a mask of fury, already composing the sermon he would deliver on Sunday about the corruption that threatened their town from within. The ride to Grant's ranch took nearly 2 hours, and Doc Brennan spent most of that time in the back of the wagon tending to Katherine. He cleaned her face, got some water down her throat, and did a preliminary examination of her injuries. By the time they pulled up to the ranch house, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed to set the prairie on fire. Grant's ranch was modest, but well-maintained. The house was a simple 2-story structure built from local timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and side. There was a barn, a corral, and several outbuildings. It was the home of a man who worked hard and took pride in what he had built, even if it was not much by some standards. He carried Katherine inside and laid her on his own bed, which was upstairs in the larger of the 2 bedrooms. The room was spare but clean, with simple furniture and curtains his mother had made before she died. It had been 5 years since a woman had been in this room, and that thought brought a sudden tightness to his chest that he pushed firmly aside. Doc Brennan shooed him out while he conducted a more thorough examination. Grant went downstairs and paced the main room, his boots creating a rhythm on the wooden floor. He had acted on instinct in town, driven by a sense of what was right, but now questions began to crowd his mind. Who was she? Where had she come from? What had happened to her? After what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, Doc Brennan came downstairs. His expression was serious but not grim. "Well," Grant asked, "she is severely dehydrated and malnourished. She has multiple bruises in various stages of healing, suggesting she has been through some sort of ordeal over the past several weeks. Her feet are badly blistered from walking long distances without proper shoes, but as for the blood on her dress..." The doctor paused. "It is not hers." Grant felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Then whose?" "That I cannot tell you. But I can tell you this. Most of the blood is concentrated on the front of her dress, around the bodice and abdomen, in a pattern consistent with someone holding another person close. If I had to guess, and mind you, this is speculation, I would say she was holding someone who was injured, possibly someone who died in her arms. A victim or someone she cared about. Again, I cannot say for certain. But Grant, I found no defensive wounds on her hands, no injuries consistent with a struggle. Whatever happened to put that blood on her dress, I do not believe she was fighting with anyone. If anything, the bruises on her arms suggest she might have been restrained or grabbed roughly at some point, but those injuries are older, at least a week or 2. Grant ran a hand through his hair. "So the preacher condemned her without knowing anything." "Matthias Sinclair sees sin everywhere he looks," Doc Brennan said with a sigh. "It is his nature. He cannot conceive of a world where bad things happen to good people, so he assumes that anyone suffering must somehow deserve it. It is easier than acknowledging how random and cruel the world can be." "Will she recover, physically?" "Yes, with rest, food, and water, mentally and emotionally. That depends on what she has been through, and I suspect that is a much longer road." The doctor packed up his bag. "I will come back tomorrow to check on her. In the meantime, see if you can get her to drink more water when she wakes. Small sips, nothing too fast. And if you have any broth or thin soup, that would be good. Her stomach will need to adjust to food again slowly." "Thank you, Doc. What do I owe you?" "Nothing. Consider it my contribution to defying Matthias Sinclair's particular brand of Christianity." The doctor smiled wryly. "Besides, something tells me you are going to need all the resources you have. The Reverend is not going to let this go." After the doctor left, Grant sat in a chair he had dragged upstairs and positioned beside the bed. Katherine was sleeping fitfully, occasionally murmuring words he could not make out. Her face, now cleaned of dirt and blood, was indeed beautiful, with high cheekbones and a graceful bone structure. Her auburn hair, washed and brushed by Doc Brennan, spread across the pillow in soft waves. He found himself wondering about her story. Everyone had one, especially out here in the territories where people came to escape their pasts or build new futures. He had learned long ago not to judge too quickly, having seen enough of life to know that circumstances could trap a person just as surely as any jail cell. His own story was not particularly dramatic. He had been born in Missouri, the son of a farmer who had dreams of better land and more opportunity. They had moved to Nebraska when Grant was 15, part of the wave of settlers who saw promise in the Platte River Valley. His father had died 2 years later from pneumonia, and his mother had lasted only another 5 years before her heart gave out. Grant had inherited the ranch and had spent the last 10 years building it into something profitable, something sustainable. He had never married, though there had been opportunities. There was Martha Simmons, who had made her interest clear, but she wanted a man who would move into town and manage her father's bank. There was Elizabeth Grant, no relation despite the shared surname, who had been sweet and kind but ultimately too fragile for ranch life. And there were a few others, brief connections that never quite caught fire. The truth was, Grant had never met anyone who made him want to change his life, and he was not willing to marry just for the sake of being married. He liked his solitude, the rhythm of ranch work, the honest simplicity of tending cattle and horses. If that meant he would spend his life alone, so be it. But now, looking at the sleeping woman in his bed, he felt something stir in his chest that he had not felt in a long time. It was not attraction exactly, though he could not deny she was beautiful. It was something deeper, a sense of recognition, as if he had been waiting for something without knowing what it was, and here it was, broken and bleeding and needing help. He shook his head at his own foolishness. She was a stranger who had stumbled into town half dead. The fact that he had helped her did not mean anything beyond common decency. She would recover, tell him what had happened, and move on to wherever she was going. His life would return to normal, except he had made an enemy of Reverend Sinclair, and that would have consequences. The preacher had a long memory and a vindictive streak. Grant had seen him ruin reputations before, turn congregations against people who crossed him. It was one of the reasons Grant only came to town when necessary and kept his distance from the church. Well, it was too late to worry about that now. He had made his choice in the street and he would stand by it. Katherine woke sometime near midnight. Grant had dozed off in the chair, his head tilted back against the wall, but the sound of her stirring brought him instantly alert. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion and fear flickering across her face as she took in her unfamiliar surroundings. "Easy," Grant said softly, leaning forward but making sure to keep some distance. "You are safe. You are at my ranch outside of Kearney. Do you remember anything about this afternoon?" Katherine's eyes found him, and he saw her struggle to focus, to pull memories from the fog of exhaustion and trauma. "There was a preacher," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "He said I was, he said. Do not worry about what he said. He does not speak for everyone." Grant reached for the glass of water on the bedside table. "Can you sit up a little? You need to drink." He helped her into a sitting position, carefully supporting her back, and held the glass to her lips. She drank greedily at first, then more slowly as her throat began to feel less like sandpaper. When she had finished, she leaned back against the pillows, exhausted by even that small effort. "Thank you," she said. "You helped me. Why? Because you needed help. That is reason enough." Tears welled up in her eyes, the first she had been able to cry in days. "You do not know what I have done. What happened? The preacher was right to say I am tainted." "Then tell me what happened," Grant said gently. "Let me hear your story before I make any judgments." Katherine looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for signs of the condemnation she had come to expect. But all she saw was patience and a quiet strength that made her feel, for the first time in weeks, that she might be able to trust another human being. "My name is Katherine Kane," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am from Illinois originally. I came west last year with my husband, Robert. He had heard there was opportunity in the Colorado territories, that a man could make something of himself. We got as far as western Nebraska before." She paused, swallowing hard. Before everything fell apart, Grant waited, not pushing, letting her take her time. "Robert was a good man, or at least I thought he was, but he had debts I did not know about, gambling debts he had hidden from me. Men came looking for him about 6 weeks ago. They said he owed them $3,000, money he had borrowed to stake a mining claim that never panned out. When he could not pay, they said they would take me instead as collateral." Grant's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "Robert tried to stop them. He really did. But there were 4 of them, and they beat him badly. They took me to a camp they had set up about 60 miles west of here, near the Colorado border. They kept me there, said they would let me go when Robert brought the money. But Robert never came." "What happened to him?" Grant asked quietly. "I do not know. I hope he got away, that he is trying to raise the money, but part of me wonders if he just ran, left me to pay for his mistakes." The bitterness in her voice was palpable. "I was there for almost a month. They did not. They did not hurt me in the ways you might think, because I was worth more to them intact as leverage. But they were not kind, and they made it clear what would happen if the debt was not paid." "How did you get away?" Katherine's face crumpled, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "There was a young man, barely 19, named Charlie. He was not like the others. He had fallen in with them because he had nowhere else to go, but he had a good heart. He used to sneak me extra food, blankets when it got cold at night. He said it was not right, what they were doing. 3 days ago, he told me he was going to help me escape. He caused a distraction, started a fight with one of the other men over a card game, and while they were all focused on that, he cut me loose and told me to run." She stopped, her breathing becoming ragged. "I ran. But they realized what had happened faster than either of us expected. I heard gunshots behind me and I hid in some rocks until it got dark. When I finally came back trying to get supplies or a horse, I found Charlie. They had shot him. He was still alive, but just barely. I held him while he died. There was so much blood. He used his last breath to tell me to keep going east, that I would find help in Kearney." Grant felt a surge of anger toward the men who had done this, but he kept his voice calm. "So the blood on your dress is Charlie's. He died trying to save me. He was just a boy, and he died because he tried to do the right thing." Katherine's voice broke completely. "And the preacher was right. I am tainted. Everyone who tries to help me suffers. Robert, Charlie, and now you should have left me in the street." "No," Grant said firmly. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her cold fingers. "You listen to me, Katherine Kane. You are not tainted. You are a survivor. You have been through hell because of your husband's mistakes and bad men's choices, but none of that is your fault. That boy, Charlie, he did not die because of you. He died because he was brave and decent, and the world needs more people like that, not fewer. And as for me, I helped you because it was the right thing to do, and I would do it again without hesitation." Katherine stared at him, stunned by the conviction in his voice. She had expected judgment, condemnation, the same cold righteousness the preacher had shown. Instead, this stranger was offering her something she thought she had lost forever: absolution. "You do not even know me," she whispered. "Then I will get to know you. But right now you need to rest. We can talk more in the morning." He tried to pull his hand away, but Katherine held on. "Please do not leave. I know it is not proper, but I cannot bear to be alone right now." Grant hesitated, then nodded. "I will stay right here in this chair. You have my word." Katherine finally released his hand and settled back into the bed. Within minutes, she was asleep again, but this time her rest seemed deeper, more peaceful. Grant watched her for a while, then settled himself as comfortably as he could in the chair and let his own eyes close. The next few days fell into a pattern. Doc Brennan came by daily to check on Katherine, and each time he reported improvement. Her body was responding well to rest and regular meals. Grant had a woman named Rosa who came from town twice a week to help with cooking and cleaning, and he asked her to come every day for a while to help Katherine with personal care and to act as a chaperone of sorts, protecting both their reputations. Rosa was a widow in her 50s, a practical woman who did not indulge in gossip, and she took an immediate liking to Katherine. She brought news from town, and the news was not good. Reverend Sinclair had indeed preached a sermon about the corruption that threatened Kearney, about a woman of ill repute who had brought violence and sin into their midst, and about the rancher who had chosen to shelter her rather than uphold community values. The sermon had split the town. Some agreed wholeheartedly with the Reverend, seeing Katherine as a threat and Grant as misguided at best, complicit at worst. Others, particularly those who had never been entirely comfortable with Sinclair's harsh brand of faith, began to quietly question whether condemning an injured woman was really what their religion required of them. Grant did not much care what the town thought. He had work to do, cattle to tend, and a ranch to run. He went about his business while Katherine recovered, though he made sure to check on her regularly and to share meals with her when he could. As Katherine's strength returned, so did her spirit. She began to talk more, sharing stories about her childhood in Illinois, her dreams of adventure that had led her to marry Robert, her slow realization that her husband was not the man she had thought he was. Grant listened and, in turn, shared pieces of his own life. His parents' deaths, the challenges of building a ranch from nothing, the satisfaction of seeing cattle thrive under his care. They discovered they shared a love of books, both of them being voracious readers despite their limited access to literature. Grant had a small collection that had belonged to his mother, and Katherine devoured them one after another. They discussed poetry and novels in the evenings, sitting on the porch as the sun set, and Grant found himself looking forward to these conversations more than he had looked forward to anything in years. It was during one of these evening talks, about 2 weeks after Katherine had arrived, that the conversation turned more personal. "Can I ask you something?" Katherine said, setting down the copy of Wuthering Heights she had been reading. "Of course. Why are you not married? A man like you with a successful ranch and, well, you are not difficult to look at. Surely women in town have shown interest." Grant felt heat creep up his neck. "Some have, I suppose, but I never saw the point in marrying just to be married. I figured if the right person came along, I would know. And if they did not, well, there are worse things than being alone." "Like being married to the wrong person," Katherine said quietly. "I did not mean." "No, you are right. I married Robert because I was 19 and foolish and he seemed exciting. He talked about adventure and opportunity, and I was so tired of the small, predictable life I was living. I thought love was supposed to feel like standing on the edge of a cliff, exhilarating and dangerous. I did not realize until too late that what I was feeling was not love at all, just recklessness dressed up to look like romance. Grant was quiet for a moment. What does love feel like, do you think? Real love, I mean. Katherine looked out at the prairie, where the last light of day was painting the grasses gold. I think it feels like coming home, like safety and challenge all at once. Like someone sees all of you, even the broken parts, and chooses to stay anyway. Their eyes met and something passed between them, a recognition that both thrilled and terrified them. Grant cleared his throat and looked away. "It is getting late. You should probably get some rest." Katherine nodded, though she felt disappointment settle in her chest. She stood and went inside, leaving Grant alone on the porch with his thoughts and the growing realization that he was falling in love with a married woman. That night, Grant could not sleep. He lay in the small bedroom downstairs that he had claimed for himself, staring at the ceiling and trying to sort through his feelings. Katherine was married. It did not matter that her husband had abandoned her, that he had gambled her life away, and then run rather than face the consequences. In the eyes of the law and the church, she was still Robert Kane's wife, and yet Grant could not help how he felt. Every day, Katherine became more vibrant, more herself. Her laugh, when it came, was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Her intelligence challenged him. Her resilience inspired him. And the way she looked at him sometimes, with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, made his heart race in a way he had never experienced before. He was treading dangerous ground. He knew it, but he could not seem to help himself. Upstairs, Katherine was having similar thoughts. She had not intended to develop feelings for Grant Hawthorne. When he had carried her from the street, she had been too far gone to even register him as a person, just as a presence, something solid in a world that had become untethered and terrifying. But as she had recovered, she had come to see him clearly. His kindness, his strength, the quiet competence with which he moved through the world. She loved the way he treated his animals with firm gentleness. She loved how he read poetry with the same seriousness he applied to repairing a fence. She loved that he had defended her to the preacher without knowing her story, that he had offered forgiveness before she had even asked for it. But she was married. Even if Robert never came for her, even if he was dead or gone forever, she was still bound to him. And she would not dishonor Grant by dragging him into the mess of her life, except it was already too late for that, was it not? He had made himself a pariah in town by helping her. The least she could do was leave before she made things worse. The next morning, Katherine came downstairs dressed in one of the simple dresses Rosa had brought her, her hair neatly braided. Grant was making coffee and he smiled when he saw her. "You look well," he said. "I feel well, thanks to you." She took a deep breath. "Grant, I need to leave. I have imposed on your hospitality long enough and I am bringing you nothing but trouble." Grant's smile faded. "Where would you go?" "I do not know. Somewhere. Anywhere. I can find work, start over, but I cannot stay here and keep ruining your reputation. My reputation will survive. And I am not sure I want you to go." The words hung in the air between them. Katherine's heart hammered in her chest. "Grant, you do not mean that." "Why not?" "Because I am married. Because I am exactly what that preacher said I am, tainted. My life is a disaster, and anyone who gets close to me suffers for it." Grant set down the coffee pot and crossed the kitchen to stand in front of her. He did not touch her, but she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the soap he used and the scent of the outdoors that clung to his clothes. "You are not tainted," he said, his voice low and intense. And I do not care what Reverend Sinclair or anyone else in that town thinks. You want to know what I think? I think you are brave. I think you have survived things that would break most people. I think you are smart and funny and stronger than you know. And I think that if you leave, I am going to regret it for the rest of my life. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. Why are you saying this? Because it is the truth. Because I have spent the last 2 weeks trying to talk myself out of feeling this way, and I cannot do it. Because every time I see you, every time we talk, I feel like I am waking up from a sleep I did not even know I was in. Grant, I am married. To a man who abandoned you, who gambled you away like you were property, who may very well be dead for all we know. But I do not know that for certain, and until I do, I am still his wife, at least in the eyes of the law. Katherine's voice broke. I cannot do this. I will not make you into the kind of man who takes another man's wife. Grant stepped back, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Then what do you want to do? I want to stay, Katherine admitted, the words pulled from somewhere deep inside her. I want to stay here with you and pretend that my past does not exist and that we could have a future together. But we cannot build something real on a foundation of lies and unresolved complications. So what do? Katherine thought for a long moment. We find out what happened to Robert. If he is alive, if he is coming back, then I will deal with that. If he is not, then maybe we can see what this is between us. But I need to know. I need to close that door before I can open another one. Grant nodded slowly. All right, then we find him. Where do we start? The men who took me. They are camped west of here near the Colorado border. If anyone knows what happened to Robert, it would be them. Then I will go talk to them. Absolutely not. Those men are dangerous. They killed Charlie without a second thought. Which is exactly why you are not going anywhere near them. But we need information, and they have it. Maybe I can approach them differently, offer to pay the debt in exchange for information. You would do that? Risk your money, your safety for me? Grant looked at her steadily. Katherine, I think I would do just about anything for you. I am just starting to realize that. They stared at each other, the air between them charged with everything they could not say, could not act on, not yet. Finally, Katherine nodded. Then we do this together. I will not let you go alone. Katherine. Together, Grant. If we are going to have any kind of future, it starts with us being honest and facing things as partners. I will not be left behind to wonder and worry. He could see the determination in her eyes and knew there was no point in arguing. All right, together. But we do this smart and careful, and we bring help. Help came in the form of Jack Morrison, Grant's nearest neighbor and closest friend. Jack ran a smaller ranch about 8 miles north, and he and Grant had an arrangement to help each other during roundups and difficult times. Jack was a few years younger than Grant, 28, with sandy hair and an easy smile that hid a shrewd mind and a quick draw. He had been a lawman briefly in Kansas before deciding that ranch life suited him better. When Grant explained the situation, Jack did not hesitate. When do we leave? They spent a day preparing, gathering supplies and horses. Rosa agreed to stay at the ranch and tend to things while they were gone. The plan was simple. Ride west to the area Katherine described, locate the camp, and approach under a flag of truce to negotiate. It took them 2 full days of hard riding to reach the area Katherine remembered. The landscape grew rougher, the grasslands giving way to rocky hills and scrub brush. Katherine guided them as best she could, but much of it looked the same, and she had been in no state to memorize landmarks when she had fled. On the 3rd day, they found it. A thin column of smoke rose from a depression between 2 hills, and when they cautiously approached, they could see 4 men lounging around a fire. A rough camp had been set up with tents and supplies, and several horses were tethered nearby. Grant raised a white cloth tied to a stick, and the three of them rode slowly into view. The men scrambled to their feet, hands going to their guns, but they did not draw when they saw the white flag. The leader was a hard-faced man in his 40s with gray streaking his beard. He squinted at them, then his eyes widened as he recognized Katherine. "Well, well," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "The little rabbit came back and brought friends. We are here to talk," Grant said evenly. "Not to fight. Talk about what?" "She belongs to us until her husband pays his debt." "She does not belong to anyone," Grant said, his voice hardening. "And I am here to settle the debt, $3,000 if I remember correctly." The leader's eyebrows rose. "You got that kind of money, I do, but first, I need information." "What happened to Robert Kane?" The man shrugged. "No idea. He ran off that first night after we collected his wife. We sent men after him, but he vanished. Figured he would show up eventually with the money, but he never did. Far as we are concerned, he is a coward and a dead man if we ever see him again. So you do not know if he is alive or dead. Do not know, do not much care. We got his wife as collateral and now you are here offering to pay. That is all that matters to me." Grant glanced at Katherine, who looked pale but composed. This was what they had come to learn, and as unsatisfying as it was information. Robert had run and had not been seen since. He could be anywhere, alive or dead. $3,000, Grant said. "I will pay it, and you will give me any paperwork or proof of debt related to Robert Kane, and you will agree to leave Katherine alone permanently." The leader scratched his beard. "That is a lot of money for a woman who is not even yours. The deal is the money for the debt and your agreement." "Do we have terms?" The man considered, then nodded. "Show me the money first." Grant had brought the money in cash, a small fortune he had saved over years of careful ranching. It represented a significant portion of his reserves, enough to make the next year tight, but he did not hesitate. He dismounted and pulled a saddlebag from his horse, opening it to reveal stacks of bills. The leader's eyes gleamed. He gestured to one of his men who brought over a crumpled piece of paper. "This is the marker Kane signed. You take it, the debt is settled. And yeah, we will leave the lady alone. We are businessmen, not monsters." "You killed a boy," Katherine said suddenly, her voice shaking with anger. "Charlie. He was 19 years old and you shot him for trying to help me." The leader's face darkened. "He betrayed us. Let you go. He knew the consequences." "He was just a kid," Jack said quietly, his hand resting on his gun. "And you executed him." "This is not a negotiation about the past," the leader said, his tone turning dangerous. "You want to call us murderers, fine, but you are standing in our camp outnumbered and I am losing patience. Take the paper, leave the money, and get out of here before I change my mind about our deal." Grant could feel the tension escalating. He took the marker, examined it to confirm it was legitimate, and then handed over the saddlebag. "The debt is paid. Katherine Kane is free and clear. If I hear that you or any of your men come near her again, I will go to the law, and I will make sure every lawman between here and Kansas knows your names and what you have done. Threats now. You got guts, I will give you that." The leader hefted the saddlebag, weighing it appreciatively. "But sure, we got our money. We got no reason to bother the lady. Far as we are concerned, this business is concluded." Grant remounted his horse, and the three of them backed away slowly, not turning their backs on the camp until they were well out of rifle range. Once they were safely away, Katherine let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said to Grant. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Grant said simply. "Now you are free of them. One problem solved, but the problem of Robert still loomed." They had learned he had run, but not where or whether he was alive. It was not the closure Katherine had hoped for, but it was something. They made camp that night under a sky so full of stars it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. Jack took the first watch, leaving Grant and Katherine sitting by the fire, wrapped in blankets against the chill. "What do we do now?" Katherine asked. "About Robert, I mean. We cannot spend our lives wondering." Grant poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "I have been thinking about that. When we get back to Kearney, I will put out inquiries. Talk to the marshal, see if anyone has heard anything about a Robert Kane. If he is alive, eventually word will surface. If he is not, well, we may never know for certain, but at some point you have to decide whether you are going to let the uncertainty control your life." "What does that mean?" Grant looked at her, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "It means that if Robert is gone, whether he is dead or just never coming back, at some point you have to consider yourself free. I know legally it is complicated, but morally, spiritually, I think you have every right to move on. The church would not agree. The church, as represented by Reverend Sinclair, has already condemned you. So what do you have to lose by living the life you want rather than the one he tells you to live?" Katherine smiled sadly. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple. That does not mean it is easy." Grant hesitated, then added, "Katherine, I know we have not known each other long, and I know the circumstances are complicated, but I need you to know that what I said before about my feelings, that was real. And whether it takes a month or a year or 10 years to sort out your situation with Robert, I will wait, if you want me to." Katherine felt her throat tighten. "Why would you do that? You could find someone else, someone without all this baggage." "I do not want someone else, I want you." The words were simple, direct, and they hit Katherine with the force of a physical blow. This man, this good, kind, impossibly patient man, was offering her everything she had ever wanted without even realizing it. Not excitement, not danger, not the false thrill of standing on a cliff's edge, but safety, partnership, a love that felt like coming home. "I want you too," she whispered. "I think I have since that first day when you carried me out of the street. You were the first person in so long to treat me like I mattered." Grant reached across the space between them and took her hand. "You do matter. To me, you matter more than anything." They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, staring into the fire, not needing to say anything more. The future was uncertain, complicated, fraught with legal and social obstacles. But in that moment, under the vast western sky, they had each other. And that was enough. When they returned to Kearney 3 days later, the town was buzzing with new rumors. Reverend Sinclair had apparently learned that Grant had paid off Katherine's husband's debt, and he had used this information to fuel his crusade. Grant was now not just harboring a sinful woman, but financially supporting her wickedness, proving that he himself had been corrupted. Grant ignored the gossip and went straight to the marshal's office. Marshal Tom Brennan, brother to Doc Brennan, was a practical man in his 60s who cared more about keeping the peace than enforcing moral codes. "I need you to put out inquiries about a man named Robert Kane," Grant explained. "Last seen about 6 weeks ago, possibly dead, possibly just gone. His wife needs to know his status for legal reasons." Marshal Brennan pulled out a pad of paper and made notes. Description. Katherine, who had accompanied Grant, provided details. Height, build, coloring, any distinguishing marks. The marshal promised to send telegrams to other law offices and to keep an ear out for any news. "But I will be straight with you," the marshal said. "If this man does not want to be found, or if he met with foul play, we may never know. The territories are big and men disappear all the time." "I understand," Katherine said, "but we have to try." As they left the marshal's office, they nearly collided with Reverend Sinclair, who seemed to have been waiting for them. "Mr. Hawthorne," the preacher said, his voice cold. And Mrs. Kane, if you even have the right to call yourself that. I want you both to know that I am organizing a town meeting to discuss the moral threat you represent to Kearney. We will not allow sin to take root in our community. You do what you need to do, Reverend, Grant said calmly, but Katherine has broken no laws and neither have I. We have nothing to answer for. You have plenty to answer for. You are living in sin, flaunting your relationship, corrupting the values we hold dear. We are not living in sin, Katherine said, her voice sharp. I am staying at Grant's ranch with a chaperone present at all times, recovering from trauma that you were perfectly willing to let kill me. If you want to call that sin, then your definition of the word is very different from mine. The preacher's face reddened. You dare speak to me of definitions? You, who arrived here covered in the blood of your victims. That blood belonged to a boy who died trying to save me from men who kidnapped me to pay my husband's gambling debts. His name was Charlie, and he was braver and more Christian than you will ever be. Katherine's voice shook with emotion. You did not ask my story. You did not offer help. You just saw blood and assumed the worst because it was easier than showing compassion. And now you want to hold a town meeting to condemn me and Grant. Go ahead. But know that every word you speak against us reveals more about your character than it does about ours. Before the preacher could respond, Katherine turned and walked away, her head held high. Grant followed, but not before giving Reverend Sinclair a look that made the other man take an involuntary step back. The town meeting was held 3 days later in the chapel. Nearly the entire population of Kearney turned out, curious to see what would happen. Grant and Katherine attended together, sitting in the back row, flanked by Doc Brennan and his brother the marshal, who had both made clear their support. Reverend Sinclair stood at the pulpit and launched into a lengthy sermon about the dangers of tolerating sin, about how communities that turned a blind eye to wickedness would eventually fall into chaos and degradation. He painted Katherine as a scarlet woman whose very presence threatened the moral fiber of the town, and Grant as a foolish man who had been seduced by her wiles. It was a powerful performance, and Grant could see it swaying some of the crowd. But then something unexpected happened. Rosa stood up. The widow had been sitting near the front, and when she rose to her feet, the Reverend paused mid-sentence. Reverend Sinclair, Rosa said, her voice clear and strong. I have a question. When that woman arrived in town, injured and dying, where were you? I was attempting to protect this community from. You were condemning her, calling her tainted, refusing her water. I was there. I saw it. Rosa looked around at the congregation. I have known Grant Hawthorne for 5 years. He is a good man, an honest man who treats everyone with respect. When he saw someone in need, he helped. That is what our faith teaches, is it not? To help those in need. Not when they are agents of sin, the Reverend said. How did you know she was an agent of sin? Did you ask her story? Did you examine the evidence? Or did you just see blood and make assumptions? Rosa turned to address the crowd directly. I have spent the last few weeks at Grant's ranch, helping Katherine recover. I have heard her story. She was kidnapped, held captive for weeks, and escaped only because a young man sacrificed his life to save her. The blood on her dress was his. She is a victim, not a criminal. Murmurs ran through the congregation. This was news to most of them. The Reverend had told them Katherine was dangerous, but he had never mentioned kidnapping or sacrifice. Doc Brennan stood next. I examined Katherine when she first arrived. Her injuries were consistent with her story. She had been restrained, starved, and forced to walk miles in terrible conditions. She was not fleeing justice. She was fleeing captivity. Another voice joined in, this one belonging to Martha Simmons, the bank manager's daughter who had once had designs on Grant. "I do not like that Grant chose to help this woman," Martha said bluntly. "I will not pretend otherwise, but that does not mean he was wrong to do it, and it certainly does not mean we should condemn them for trying to do the right thing." More voices rose, some in support of the Reverend, others questioning his version of events. The meeting devolved into a heated debate that went on for over an hour. Finally, Marshal Brennan stood and held up his hands for silence. "Here is what I know for fact," the marshal said. "Katherine Kane broke no laws. Grant Hawthorne broke no laws. What they have done, or have not done, in terms of moral conduct is between them and God, not between them and this town. And if Reverend Sinclair wants to continue preaching against them, that is his right. But he cannot force this town to shun them or drive them out. This is still America, and people are still free to make their own choices." The marshal's words carried weight, and the meeting ended without any formal action being taken. But the town remained divided. Some continued to view Katherine with suspicion and Grant as a fool. Others began to see them differently, as people who had been caught up in circumstances beyond their control and were trying to navigate an impossible situation with dignity. For Grant and Katherine, the meeting was exhausting but also clarifying. They realized that they would never satisfy everyone, that no matter what they did, some people would find fault. And in that realization came a kind of freedom. They stopped worrying so much about what Kearney thought and focused instead on building a life that made sense to them. Weeks turned into months. Summer faded into autumn, and still there was no word about Robert Kane. Katherine continued to live at Grant's ranch, and while Rosa remained as a chaperone, everyone in the household knew that the relationship between Grant and Katherine had deepened into something profound, even if they were careful about propriety. They worked together on the ranch, Katherine proving to have a natural affinity for the work. She learned to ride properly, to help with the cattle, to manage the account books. She found she loved the rhythm of ranch life, the way each day brought tangible accomplishments, the satisfaction of seeing animals thrive under her care. And she fell more deeply in love with Grant with each passing day. She loved the way he rose before dawn, greeting each day with quiet determination. She loved how he was patient with difficult animals, firm but never cruel. She loved the rare moments when he laughed, a deep rumbling sound that seemed to come from his core. She loved his hands, scarred and calloused from work, and the gentle way he used them. Grant, for his part, had stopped fighting his feelings. He was in love with Katherine Kane, completely and irrevocably. He loved her strength, the way she had rebuilt herself from the shattered pieces of her trauma. He loved her quick mind, the way she could calculate figures faster than he could and remember details he forgot. He loved her compassion, the way she tended to injured animals with the same care Grant had shown her. He loved waking up knowing she was under his roof, and he dreaded the day she might leave. But the question of Robert hung over them like a shadow. Without knowing his fate, Katherine could not fully move forward. She was in limbo, legally married but practically abandoned. The answer came in late October, 6 months after Katherine had first arrived in Kearney. Marshal Brennan came to the ranch with a telegram. He looked grim as he handed it to Katherine. The message was from a marshal in Colorado. A body had been found in the mountains, dead for several months from exposure and what appeared to be injuries sustained in a fall. The description matched Robert Kane, and personal effects found with the body confirmed the identification. Katherine read the telegram twice, then handed it to Grant with shaking hands. She felt a complicated rush of emotions. Grief for the man Robert had been when she first met him, relief that the uncertainty was over, guilt for feeling that relief. "I am sorry," Grant said quietly. "I do not know what I feel," Katherine admitted. He was not a good husband. He abandoned me to save himself, but he was still a person and he is dead. You are allowed to mourn him, even if the marriage was not what you wanted it to be." Katherine nodded, tears streaming down her face. Grant pulled her into his arms and she buried her face in his chest and wept. She cried for Robert, for the dreams she had lost, for Charlie, for all the pain and fear of the past year. And Grant held her through it all, steady and solid, a safe harbor in the storm. The funeral was small. Katherine insisted on it, despite having no body to bury. They held a simple service in the town cemetery, just Katherine, Grant, the Brennan brothers, and Rosa. Reverend Sinclair refused to participate, so Doc Brennan read a few verses from the Bible and said a prayer. Katherine placed a wooden cross in the ground with Robert's name carved into it, a marker for a man who would never rest beneath it. Afterwards, as they walked back to Grant's wagon, Katherine felt lighter than she had in months. The shadow had lifted. She was a widow now, free in the eyes of the law and the church to make her own choices. "What will you do now?" Grant asked as they drove back to the ranch. "I do not know," Katherine said. "What do you think I should do?" Grant was quiet for a long moment. "I think you should do whatever makes you happy. If that means staying here, then I would be honored. If it means leaving, starting fresh somewhere new, then I will help you do that. I just want you to be happy, Katherine." "What would make me happy is staying here with you," Katherine said. "If you will have me, not as a guest or a responsibility, but as your partner. I know we cannot marry right away, that there is a proper mourning period, but—" "I will wait as long as necessary," Grant interrupted. "A year, 2 years, whatever propriety demands. As long as I know that you are choosing this, choosing me, I can wait." Katherine smiled through fresh tears. "I am choosing you, Grant Hawthorne. I choose you every day, and I will keep choosing you for the rest of my life." They did observe a mourning period, though it was more for the benefit of the town than out of genuine grief. For 6 months, Katherine wore dark colors and remained at the ranch, and during that time, she and Grant continued to build their partnership. They worked side by side during the day and spent evenings reading, talking, planning for the future. Grant proposed on a spring evening in April of 1880, nearly a year after Katherine had first arrived in Kearney. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when he pulled out a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "Katherine Kane, you are the bravest, strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known," he said, dropping to one knee. "You have brought light and life to this ranch and to me. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Katherine did not hesitate. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They kissed for the first time then, a gentle joining that promised passion and devotion in equal measure. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling so broadly it hurt. The wedding was planned for June, giving them time to make arrangements. They debated whether to hold it in Kearney or to travel to another town, but ultimately decided they would not be driven from their home by disapproval. They asked Marshal Brennan if he would perform the ceremony, as he was authorized to do so, avoiding any conflict with Reverend Sinclair. The day of the wedding was perfect, warm and clear with a breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers. They held the ceremony at the ranch, in the yard between the house and the barn. Grant wore his best suit, dark and simple, and Katherine wore a dress that Rosa had helped her make, white with delicate embroidery. Nearly 50 people attended, far more than they had expected. Doc Brennan was there, of course, along with Rosa, Martha Simmons and her family, Jack Morrison, and many of the ranchers and townspeople who had come to respect Grant and Katherine over the past year. Even some who had initially sided with Reverend Sinclair had softened their stance, won over by the couple's quiet dignity and the obvious depth of their love. The ceremony was simple, but heartfelt. Grant and Katherine exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to stand by each other through whatever challenges life brought, to build a home based on respect and partnership, to love each other faithfully until death parted them. When Marshal Brennan pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up could be heard for miles. Grant kissed his bride with a joy that radiated from him like light, and Katherine kissed him back with the same fierce happiness. The celebration that followed was lively, with food and music and dancing. Grant, who claimed he could not dance, surprised everyone by waltzing with Katherine with surprising grace. She laughed in his arms, her face radiant, and for those moments, the past year's hardships seemed like nothing more than a bad dream. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Grant and Katherine slipped away to the porch where they had spent so many evenings. They sat close together, Katherine's head resting on Grant's shoulder, and watched the stars emerge one by one. "Are you happy?" Grant asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Katherine said. "A year ago I was in hell. I thought my life was over. And now I am here, married to the most wonderful man I have ever known, with a home and a future and hope. It feels like a miracle." "You are the miracle," Grant said. "You survived when most people would have given up. You kept going, kept fighting, and you built something beautiful from the ashes. I am just lucky enough to get to be part of it." Katherine turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. "We are both lucky, and I promise you, Grant, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "Impossible," Grant said, kissing her forehead. "Choosing you was the easiest thing I have ever done." Their first year of marriage was a time of adjustment and joy. Katherine took over the management of the household, implementing systems that made the ranch run more efficiently. She also started a small vegetable garden that quickly grew into a substantial operation, producing more than they needed and allowing them to sell the surplus in town. Grant, for his part, found that having a true partner transformed not just his home but his work. Katherine had a good eye for cattle and could spot problems he sometimes missed. She helped during calving season, often staying up all night with difficult births. She rode beside him during roundups, fearless and capable. They became a team in every sense of the word. The town's attitude toward them continued to evolve. Reverend Sinclair never changed his stance, occasionally preaching sermons that obliquely referenced the couple's sins, but his influence waned as people saw the reality of Grant and Katherine's marriage. They were respectable, hardworking, and generous. They donated to worthy causes, helped neighbors in need, and caused no scandal. Even Martha Simmons, who had initially been so opposed to Katherine, eventually became something of a friend. She stopped by the ranch one day ostensibly to discuss a donation to the school and stayed for tea. As they sat on the porch, Martha finally addressed the elephant in the room. "I owe you an apology," Martha said abruptly. "When you first came to town, I was awful about you. I saw you as a threat and a scandal, and I said unkind things. But watching you this past year, seeing the life you and Grant have built, I realize I was wrong. You are good for him and for this town. I am sorry." Katherine was touched by the admission. "Thank you, Martha. That means a great deal. Grant is a lucky man. I hope he knows that." "I tell him every day," Katherine said with a smile. "And I am lucky too, luckier than I ever deserved to be." In the spring of 1881, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled both her and Grant with a joy so profound it was almost frightening. They had talked about children, hoped for them, but the reality was overwhelming. Doc Brennan confirmed the pregnancy and predicted a late autumn birth. Katherine bloomed as the months progressed, her body changing in ways that amazed and delighted Grant. He became even more protective than usual, insisting she not overwork herself, bringing her anything she needed before she could ask. Katherine found the pregnancy surprisingly easy until the final months, when the summer heat made everything more difficult. She spent those weeks resting as much as her restless nature would allow, sewing tiny clothes and preparing the upstairs bedroom that would become the nursery. Their son was born on a cold November night in 1881, after a labor that lasted 14 hours and left Katherine exhausted but triumphant. Grant was present for the birth, holding Katherine's hand and whispering encouragement, and when Doc Brennan finally placed the squalling infant in his arms, Grant wept openly. They named him William Thomas Hawthorne, after Grant's father and the marshal who had supported them. He was a healthy baby with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes, and from the moment he entered the world, he owned his parents' hearts completely. Fatherhood transformed Grant in subtle ways. He had always been a gentle man, but with William, he discovered depths of tenderness he had not known he possessed. He would spend hours just holding his son, marveling at the tiny, perfect fingers and toes, singing lullabies his own mother had sung to him. Katherine watched her husband with their child and fell even more deeply in love. This was the man the preacher had called corrupted, who had been condemned for showing mercy to a stranger. And here he was, the best father she could imagine, the best husband, the best man. The years flowed by, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. William grew from infant to toddler to a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and everything about it. A daughter, Margaret Rose, arrived in 1883, followed by another son, David, in 1885. The house that had once been too quiet for one person now rang with the sounds of children laughing, playing, arguing, and learning. Grant expanded the ranch gradually, buying adjacent land when it became available, increasing the herd, building a reputation for quality cattle. Katherine managed the finances with such skill that they not only prospered, but were able to save substantial amounts for the future and for their children. The town of Kearney grew as well, the railroad bringing more commerce and more people. Reverend Sinclair eventually retired, his influence having waned significantly, and was replaced by a younger minister with a more compassionate approach to faith. The new Reverend, Samuel Wright, reached out to Grant and Katherine, asking if they would consider attending services. They declined politely, but did start attending occasionally for special events, wanting their children to have some religious education even if they themselves remained wary of organized religion. Reverend Wright proved to be understanding and never pressed the issue. In 1889, 10 years after Katherine had first stumbled into Kearney, the town held a celebration for its 20th anniversary of incorporation. Grant and Katherine attended with their 3 children, now aged 7, 5, and 3. It was the first major town event they had participated in as a family, and Katherine felt a flutter of nervousness as they approached the main square where festivities were being held, but the nervousness proved unfounded. People greeted them warmly, admiring the children, asking about the ranch. Several people made a point of thanking Grant and Katherine for their contributions to the community over the years. It was a far cry from that first day when Katherine had collapsed in the street and been condemned without a hearing. As they stood watching the children play with other youngsters from town, Katherine felt Grant's arm slip around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how far we have come. About how different my life is now compared to what it was. About how grateful I am for every choice that led me here, even the painful ones." Grant kissed the top of her head. "I am grateful too, every single day. Do you ever think about that first day, when you carried me out of the street? sometimes. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen, even half dead and covered in blood. I remember deciding in that moment that I would not let you die, no matter what anyone said. The preacher said I was tainted. And I said you were forgiven. Turns out we were both wrong. Katherine looked up at him, puzzled. How so? You were never tainted to begin with. There was nothing to forgive. You were just a woman who had been through hell and needed help. The rest, everything we have built that came from who you really are, strong, smart, compassionate, brave. I did not save you, Katherine. You saved yourself. I just had the good sense to stick around and see what happened. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. After 10 years of marriage, Grant could still say things that moved her to her core. We saved each other, she said firmly. I was drowning and you threw me a rope. But you were lonely, living half a life, and I gave you a reason to live fully. We made each other whole. They stood together as the celebration continued around them. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life on a foundation of love, respect, and forgiveness. Not the kind of forgiveness a preacher dispenses from a pulpit, full of conditions and judgment, but the real kind, the kind that sees all of a person, the broken and the beautiful, and chooses to love them anyway. Years continued to pass, and the Hawthorne family became one of the most respected in the region. William grew into a capable young man who shared his father's love of ranching and his mother's sharp business mind. Margaret proved to have a gift for horses, training them with patience and skill. David was the dreamer of the family, always with his nose in a book, talking about becoming a teacher. Grant and Katherine grew older together, their bodies marked by time and hard work, but their love never diminishing. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, weathered droughts and hard winters, mourned the deaths of old friends and welcomed new neighbors. Rosa passed away peacefully in 1895, and Katherine wept at her funeral, remembering the widow who had stood up for her in that town meeting so long ago. Doc Brennan followed in 1897, and Marshall Brennan in 1899. Each loss was a reminder of how precious life was, how important it was to cherish the people who mattered. In 1900, William married a young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and a year later, they presented Grant and Katherine with their first grandchild, a girl named Katherine after her grandmother. Holding that baby, seeing her own name carried forward, Katherine was overcome with emotion. I never thought I would have this, she told Grant that night as they lay in bed. A family, grandchildren, a legacy. After everything that happened, after being told I was tainted and worthless, I never imagined I would end up here. You deserve all of it, Grant said. Every bit of happiness, every moment of joy, and I am honored to have been able to give you even a small part of it. Small? Grant, you gave me everything. You gave me my life back. He pulled her close, and they lay together in the comfortable silence of two people who had shared decades of life and love. Outside, the Nebraska wind whispered through the grass, the same wind that had been blowing the day Katherine first arrived, broken and bleeding and desperate. But now that wind carried different whispers, the sounds of children playing, horses nickering in the barn, the peaceful rhythms of a life well lived. As Katherine drifted off to sleep, she thought about the preacher's words from so long ago. She had been called tainted, marked by sin, unworthy of mercy. But Grant had looked at her and seen something different. He had seen a woman worth saving, worth loving, worth building a life with. The preacher had been wrong. Grant had been right, and in the end, that had made all the difference. Grant and Katherine lived to see all three of their children married and settled. They saw 8 grandchildren born. They celebrated their 30th anniversary in 1910 with a party that drew people from 3 counties, a testament to the respect and affection they had earned over the years. Grant died peacefully in his sleep in 1912, at the age of 65. He simply went to bed one night beside the woman he loved and did not wake up. Katherine was devastated but also grateful that he had not suffered, that his last moments had been peaceful. She lived another 8 years, spending that time surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still sharp-minded and active even as her body slowed. She told her grandchildren stories about their grandfather, about the ranch, about the early days when everything was hard but full of possibility. And sometimes, when the children begged for it, she told them the story of how she and Grant had met. She told them about stumbling into town more dead than alive, about the preacher who condemned her, and about the cowboy who said she was worth saving. She told them about falling in love despite all the obstacles, about building a life from nothing, about choosing each other every single day. The most important thing, she would tell them, is not what other people say about you. It is who you choose to be and who you choose to love. Your grandfather taught me that. He saw me when I could not see myself, and he loved me not despite my brokenness, but with it, as a whole person who had survived terrible things and come out stronger. Katherine Hawthorne died in the spring of 1920, at the age of 63, surrounded by her family. Her last words were her husband's name, spoken with a smile, as if she could see him waiting for her just beyond the veil. They buried her beside Grant on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and dates, but someone, perhaps one of the grandchildren, had added a line beneath Katherine's name. She was never tainted. She was always forgiven. She was forever loved. The ranch passed to William and eventually to his children, staying in the Hawthorne family for generations. The story of Grant and Katherine became family legend, told and retold, embellished and refined, but always carrying the same essential truth. That love, real love, is not about finding someone perfect. It is about finding someone imperfect and choosing to see them, accept them, and cherish them exactly as they are, in the town of Kearney, Nebraska, where a preacher once condemned a dying woman and a cowboy defied him to save her. Their story became part of the local history. The house they lived in still stands, marked with a historical plaque that tells their story in brief, sanitized terms. But the real story, the one about redemption and forgiveness and love that conquered judgment, lives on in the memories of their descendants and in the hearts of anyone who hears it and understands that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories are the ones that start with one person looking at another and choosing kindness over condemnation, love over judgment, hope over despair. The preacher had said she was tainted. The cowboy had said she was forgiven. But the truth, the real truth that Katherine and Grant discovered together, was simpler and more profound than either of those pronouncements. She was human, flawed and beautiful and worthy of love, just like everyone else. And that was enough. It had always been enough.